Welcome to Fight Back Radio, production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggles. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and it's really great to be here. This is our first full-length show with a guest. We have a very special guest for you. If you have a passion for justice, you're going to love this show, I believe, in this interview with Kobi Guillory. And Kobi is the co-chair of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. He's also on the executive board of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And you'll hear him talking about those things. He was born in Georgia, but grew up in South Africa, so that gives him a unique experience. He's distinguished himself over the last several years here in Chicago as a leader of the Black Liberation Movement and the fight for Black liberation here in Chicago and across the country. And he's a young man who I think you're going to hear a lot about. So he's appropriate to be our first guest. And you're going to hear him talk about the things the Alliance has been involved in, community control of the police, freeing political prisoners, police torture. But I think some of what he does that's important is he brings the debate about power to the streets, and it comes across in this interview, the things that they're doing and how they're doing them in the Alliance. So we hope you'll enjoy it, and I want to thank everybody who listened to the teaser for our Fight Back radio show. I was surprised at the overwhelming support that we got. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but I thank you all for that, and hopefully you liked it. And you know, we're looking for feedback. If you want to reach me, I'm at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. That's richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. So I'm not going to keep you listening to me. I think we have a good interview here. So here's Kobi Guillory. So I'm here with Kobi Guillory from the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. The National Alliance this year had a conference, which was, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that conference and where the Alliance came from in the first place.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm sure this is going to be a great podcast. The National Alliance formed in 1973. It came out of the movement to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. Just like a little bit about the political background. In the 70s and 80s, as a response to the civil rights movements, the Black Power movement, as a response to basically the fight of Black people to be free in this country, the state and the white supremacist system skyrocketed incarceration and policing. So you've seen police budgets since the 1970s just skyrocket, and especially over the past 20 years. And the prison population went from below 500,000 in 1970 to well over 2 million right now. So the National Alliance is a defense organization built to defend oppressed people against this white supremacist system. And the way the movement is, we can't have millions of people in the streets all the time. So what was a huge movement with all kinds of mobilizations in the 70s kind of slowed down and was carried on by a few veterans, a few really strong comrades like Frank Chapman, like Ted Pearson, and other veterans of the struggle, until more recently, with the uprisings in Ferguson, the fight for justice for Laquan McDonald here in Chicago, the fight for justice for Tamir Rice, justice for Mike Brown, the movement for Black liberation kind of became revitalized in the past few years, and more people started joining the Chicago Alliance, which, as of 2019, was one of two National Alliance chapters left. So we had a refounding conference in November of 2019. About 1,000 people came. Angela Davis was there. This was, of course, before the pandemic. And a bunch of chapters formed around the country. And because of the pandemic, we had to delay our second conference. but we had it in December of 2021, and that conference was a huge success because it brought together so many people from different cities, fighting different fights in around the country, and we're all here fighting for one thing, which is, for liberation and for an end to this white supremacist system.
So let me go back then. This is interesting. So the first National Alliance was founded because of the struggle to free Angela Davis and people like Frank Chapman, you're saying. Mm-hmm. And so that's the same organization from the early 1970s that there's a string that you can connect to today. And so I remember when it was refounded in 2019, because it was at my union, the Chicago Teachers Union, was at our hall. And we were proud, our members were proud to be part of that. But could you talk a little bit about that connection from the old alliance, the Committee to Free Angela Davis, to what happened in 2019?
Yeah, I mean, Angela Davis got freed by that struggle, as did Frank Chapman. He was a political prisoner as well. But a lot of political prisoners are still locked up. A lot of Black Panthers, people like Mumia Abu-Jamal, people like Leonard Peltier, who was a part of the American Indian movement, are still locked up to this day. And
these are all political prisoners.
Yeah, these are political prisoners, and there are also there are political reasons for this system of mass incarceration to exist. So where we have to fight against the whole system. So that's what we're doing by fighting for the freedom of particular people, political prisoners, as well as people like Gerald Reed, who was freed in April last year, who were tortured into confessing to crimes that they didn't commit, as well as people who were framed. So
is that the main thing the Alliance does, is get people out of jail, or try to get people out of jail?
It's one of the main things we do, one of the two main things. The second thing is the fight for community control of the police. That's also a struggle that is connected to the fight of the Black Panthers and other Black liberation organizations in the 60s and 70s, because what they were fighting for was more control over their own communities. One of the things that has become a huge topic over the past couple of years is police budgets versus the budget for pretty much everything else in the city. Black communities and other oppressed communities didn't choose to have their schools shutting down while police budgets are skyrocketing. This was chosen for them by an oppressive system run by a handful of rich, mostly white people. So our fight, before we can do anything, before we can say what the system should look like, we have to struggle for power over the system. So we've been fighting for community control of the police. In Chicago, that fight took the form of a Civilian Police Accountability Council in 2012. That was after Rekia Boyd was murdered by a police officer. And that fight was to get justice for Rekia Boyd, and joined with the fight to get justice for Laquan McDonald.
Well, take a second there. So who is Rekia Boyd? Who is Laquan McDonald? For our listeners around the country who may not know, could you give a little background there?
Yeah, so Rekia Boyd was shot by an off-duty police officer. Laquan McDonald was also shot by a police officer, and these were, very public cases, especially Laquan McDonald, because his murder happened on video. And it took a lot of pressure to make the city release that video. There's a lot of different struggles around those cases to get them to release the footage of the police crimes.
So what was on the video of Laquan? And for people that haven't seen it, why was that such a big deal?
It was pretty horrific. This police officer, Jason Van Dyke, shot Laquan while he was walking away from Van Dyke. He shot him 16 times. Most of the times he shot him were while he was on the ground, dead, essentially. And it took more than a year, about I think 400 days, for the mayor at the time, Rahm Emanuel, to release the footage because there was so much pressure from activists and organizers in just, the city. And the slogan became 16 shots and a cover-up because, that's the kind of the connection between the individual police officers, like Dante Servin, who killed Rekia Boyd, like Jason Van Dyke, who killed Laquan McDonald, or Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd. What we see with these cases is that the city structure, the power structure, comes and tries to shield those cops from being held accountable. So Rahm Emanuel covered up the footage, working together with the prosecutor at the time, Anita Alvarez. Both of them are gone now because that kind of tanked their careers because the city hates them.
Rahm's in Japan right now, I think, right?
He is
trying to make a comeback. He's the ambassador to Japan. I think Joe Biden just appointed him that.
Yeah, and we have a long memory, so we'll do everything we can to, any good thing that is coming to Rahm Emanuel, whatever way we can block that is something that we're going to do.
So talk a little bit about Rekia Boyd. Who is that, and why? That name may not be known to our listeners across the country.
Yeah. So like I said, she was murdered by Dante Servin, who was an off-duty cop. So he was, just walking around. He wasn't even on the job at the time. And if I recall correctly, there was some kind of a noise complaint or something, and he shot into a car and, ended up killing her. Not just ended up, he killed her on purpose. But as a result of that, some organizers with the Chicago Alliance, together with people from other organizations, came together in 2012. And, what they said was, we can't just focus on this one individual police officer. We have to link this to the fact that about 1,000 black people are killed every year. Or actually, I don't think it's just black people. 1,000 people are killed every year by the police in this country. And, that's something that we need. We need a systemic change to stop that.
So that was key in trying to pull together a national organization again, is to try to not just look at the Chicago tragedies, but also connect it, as you mentioned, Michael Brown and in Ferguson and Trayvon Martin in Florida and other stories like this that have happened around the country. Is that correct? Or
sort of. It was the beginning of that process of connecting things back nationally. But it was a Chicago initiative, and just the nature of the laws being different in every city. We had to figure out. I say we. I wasn't there. I was about 14, 16 at the time. But the strategy is to go through the electoral system, which is different in different cities. So it was like a very Chicago-specific struggle, but a lot of people from different cities have been inspired by that struggle and have started their own struggles for community control.
So when you say go through the electoral system, what do you mean exactly?
So in order to get a legislation passed, which CPAC was a legislation...
So what does that stand for, CPAC?
I think I said it, but it's Civilian Police Accountability Council. Okay. Not the other CPAC with the Republicans. But yeah,
we're not worried about confusing you with them, right?
Yeah, I'm not Ted Cruz. But yeah, it was the strategy, and still that still is a large part of our strategy. Is to go through city council, which you have to do in the city to get any kind of legislation passed. You need a majority of the city council to vote for the legislation. And if you don't want the legislation to get vetoed, you need a super majority, which is about 60% of the council. And we've been struggling through that. So for about 8 years, between 2012 and 2020, the fight was for CPAC. In 2020,
So let me stop you there. So okay, so we're fighting for community control of the police, and this goes back to Black Panther Party, probably even to Reconstruction, where there's fights of black people in oppressed communities to fight for community control of the police. so we're going through an electoral process here in Chicago and maybe around the country, but why would anybody oppose that? Shouldn't the community, what alderman would ever be against that? What reasons would they give you for not supporting controlling your own community?
Yeah, I mean, the main reason is racism, just to be blunt about it. But I think it's good that you mentioned during Reconstruction in a lot of southern states, in the Black Belt South, black people had political power, which includes control over the police, and they used that power to virtually eradicate the KKK. So if you're in the KKK, you don't want black people to have this kind of political power. And the people who would have been in the KKK about 150 years ago are in the police force now, and they exercise a lot more political power than we do. They have the Fraternal Order of Police, and pretty much every mayor of Chicago for as long as I've been alive, which is about 25 years, has been pro-police, and which necessarily I think
you can go back further than 25 years.
Right. I didn't want to make too bold of a claim, but the mayor is squarely in the pocket of, like I mentioned before, the white supremacists who own all the resources, or virtually all the resources in the city, and not just the city, but the country and the world. And their interest is in keeping black people impoverished, keeping black people imprisoned, so that we don't have some kind of revolution. Because all of this came out of slavery. All of this, if the ruling class had their way, we would still be slaves in this country. And they've been trying everything they can do to re-enslave us, through all kinds of different mechanisms, through terrorism with the KKK and with the police, through incarceration, and as well as economic and political and social and cultural methods. There's all kinds of propaganda that has been put out into people's heads about why the police need to be this unaccountable force, standing above the scum of society, basically. And that rhetoric is very strong with us today. The protesters who were fighting for justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others, have been labeled in the news as basically terrorists, criminals. Every kind of smear has been put against us, because we're trying to change the world. We're trying to make it. We're trying to take the wealth from this fraction of 1% of society and put it in the hands of everybody. And we're doing that by politically empowering oppressed people.
So I want to get in a minute to what does community control of the police look like. But before we do, police killing black people has been a fact for whatever, since up to slavery times and since then. And so there's been this justifications of self-defense, etc., going back for a long time. But then, more recent times, we started to get video evidence through telephones and people shooting cameras from. I remember when Rodney King was beaten. That was very rare for them to catch that kind of beating in Los Angeles on video. But this led to a building situation to, I want to talk about George Floyd, who was in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And when George Floyd was murdered, it seemed to have a huge impact on our whole country, and especially, I think, the movement that you're part of the leadership of right now. Could you talk about George Floyd and what impact it had, not just here in Chicago, but everywhere, and how that affected your movement and changed it possibly?
Yeah, I think one thing about Minneapolis is that they have a chapter of the National Alliance over there called the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar, and I'm not sure exactly when they were formed, but they were formed to fight for justice for Jamar Clark and everyone who was killed by the police. And what many people have been, the point that many people have been making for a while now, and especially during the rebellion.
So just to say, Jamar Clark was similar to Laquan McDonald kind of situation? Okay.
And, exactly, like that's the point that I was about to get into, is that there's all these names, there's Rekia Boyd, there's Sandra Bland, there's Jamar Clark, there's Laquan McDonald, there's Trayvon Martin, there's all these names of people who were killed by the police, and, very few police are ever held accountable, and even less often do we see any kind of systemic change coming out of that. Seeing somebody getting murdered in broad daylight is a very traumatic thing to experience, and the fact that as Black people we see that over and over and over and over again, at a certain point, you can only take that for so long, and people got out in the streets, and they voiced their anger at that. Because it's been happening for such a long time, so blatantly.
So let me dig in a little bit to this then. I want to get to what does community control of the police look like. And, some people refer back to the Black Panther Party. It was originally called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And their, I think it was point 7 of their 10-point program talked about community control of the police. And, following them was the National Alliance and the fight to free Angela Davis and some of that. So what is, in your view, what does community control of the police actually look like? Let me just start there. What would you think? What does that look like?
Just to steal a quote from Frank Chapman, it looks like people having the power to decide who polices their communities and how those communities are policed, which means that, like I said, Black people don't want racist cops running around killing people, and even more often than that, brutalizing people, arresting people for no reason, or for the most trivial reasons. So Black people having control, and not just Black people, every oppressed community, but it comes down on Black people the hardest, just because of the history of this country. Community control looks like us having the power to stop that, as collectively deciding if a cop has one brutality complaint against them, they cannot be in a school. They cannot be on the force anymore. That's the kind of thing. That's the kind of power that we want to have. When we see in Chicago, you can just take a picture of a cop's badge number, look them up, and you'll find 20-something complaints, and none of them resulted in anything significant. So there's that, and there's that's the who polices our communities aspect, and how they're policed is about deciding on policy, deciding on what actually happens, because it is, one of the ways that we've built up this movement is by canvassing in the streets, just being outside, talking to people, and getting their contact details and kind of getting them into the movement that way. And when you're doing that, one of the things that you might hear from people when you're talking about stopping police crime, stopping police from killing people, is you might see an auntie that says, well, what about my son who was murdered? What about my nephew, or something like that? And the response to that is that police in Chicago solve about 20% of murders on the South Side. It's a shockingly low rate, and they had higher conviction rates before that because they were just torturing people into confessing to things that they didn't do. So those are the kinds of practices, that should end immediately, and it's common sense that they should end, but we don't have the collective power to actually end them, and that's what community control would give us. Okay, so let's take this forward then a little bit. So the Alliance formed and drafted actual legislation and tried to get it passed through the City Council, called the Civilian Police Accountability Council Act, and then eventually they ended up supporting something called
Empowering Communities for Public Safety, ECPS. So could you walk us through what happened there? Did you get everything you want? Did you make compromises? Why did you make compromises, if so? Or how did that look?
Yeah, so it helps to think about politics as a struggle, between oppressed and oppressors, between the ruling class and the working class, because in any kind of fight you kind of have to make pivots, you have to move back, you have to make all kinds of maneuvers. You can't just be running forward at the enemy 100% of the time. So after 2020, we found ourselves in a new position, and we had to make some adjustments based on that. And there was this other organization, the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability, or GAPA, that had kind of been struggling for a different legislation since 2014, just kind of parallel to us. And their strategy was a little bit different in that they kind of wanted the mayor's cooperation, whereas we wanted to polarize as many members of city council as possible against the mayor. And what 2020 made very clear was that the mayor is not at all interested in holding police accountable in any way, systemically, individually. She sent police to brutalize and arrest people, countless times throughout the summer of 2020. And, she continues to increase police budgets. And I could go on and on about how terrible Lori Lightfoot and other Chicago mayors are. But what GAPA saw that eventually, and they split with the mayor, as did a lot of alderpersons who were in support of the GAPA ordinance, and they we came together and decided that we have to seize the moment and come up with some kind of joint ordinance, because we had about 19 aldermanic supporters. We needed 26 for a majority and 33 for a veto-proof majority. And they had about 20-something, and there was some overlap between who was in support of GAPA and who was in support of CPAC. And we came together, decided, to hash out a new ordinance that was going to be a mixture of theirs and of ours. And it was a very, very difficult process, because people have all kinds of different political views within that coalition. And, without getting too much into the details of what the ordinance is, we didn't get everything that we wanted, but what we got was a vital step towards community control of the police, because we have this ordinance. This is concrete legislation that is that is the law of Chicago right now. And that law establishes a citywide commission as well as district councils, which are organizing bodies that we have to fill up now. So we kind of gave ourselves a lot more work.
Eventually, this will be elections from the community, though, right? So people in each police district will elect people that will have some control over the police in those districts, or citywide. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. So citywide, the citywide commission will have control over policy, as well as some input into the budget process. The local districts are going to be more organizing bodies. Those are elected, directly elected. But we also have a referendum currently in city council right now that we're trying to push our alderpersons to speak up for, to vote for, as soon as possible, which will create a referendum. And the referendum is putting the question directly to the people of Chicago. The text of it goes something like, do you want the citywide commission to be directly elected? Do you want it to have control over the budget, as well as direct control over hiring and firing of the superintendent of police? So that, of course, is much more control over the police than what we have currently. But again, ECPS was a step forward in that it gave us this new option, we can make another step. And also we have this coalition of organizations that were fighting behind ECPS and that are still with us right now in fighting for this referendum, and in a few other struggles that we're in right now. And this coalition is composed of organizations like ours, as well as unions and faith-based groups. So it's a very broad political force that we're building up right now.
So the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression has a reputation of uniting broad numbers of people, putting people in the streets, having protests of thousands of people. And the National Alliance called for protests nationally after the George Floyd situation. And now we're talking about actually electing people, going out knocking on doors. Lobbying people in city council, maybe trying to elect this person or not elect that person. Could you talk about the balance between, and I know you guys have tabled on the corners throughout the city, but especially on the south side of Chicago where the black community is, and the west side. And can you talk about, has it shifted now? Should we be focusing more on electoral politics, or is there still a place for protest? And how does that work? And what would your advice be to people across the country who are, trying to do what Chicago did in passing an ordinance and trying to get community control of the police? How do those tactics fit?
There's always a place for protest. I love a good protest, especially if it's outside somebody's house or something like that. The more combative, the more in your face, the better. But at the same time, the enemy uses a lot of tactics to keep us down, and if we avoid any tactic, then we're essentially conceding that ground to the enemy. And when I say the enemy, I just want to be clear. It's that fraction of a percent of people who that fraction of a percent of mostly white people who own all the resources and basically make all the political decisions in this country. And they are very interested in electoral politics, and they are very interested in putting down protest. So what we do is we, engage in electoral politics and we engage in protests. So there's that, and there's, we have lobbying, we have these pressure campaigns on alderpersons. That's, we do that all the time, is, getting people to call your alderperson, tell them to vote for the referendum, vote for ECPS. And to people in other cities, we have alliance chapters in, I think, 22 different cities. So if there is an alliance chapter in your city, join that, because you'll never, ever get any kind of systemic change as an individual. So you want to be a part of an organization, and I think this is a pretty good organization to be a part of.
It's a good time for the commercial. What's what's the website? How do they find the National Alliance? Or what's we'll put it in the show notes as well for people here, so you can scroll down later and check that out. But go ahead, Kobi. How do people reach the Alliance?
Yeah, the National Alliance is narpr.org, naarpr.org. The Chicago Alliance is carper.org. It's the same thing with the C, so it's caarpr.org. The Chicago Alliance is also on Twitter, as is the National Alliance. The Chicago Alliance is Carper Now, and the National Alliance is Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. I don't think the word national is in the name. But yeah, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you look up National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression in the search bar, you will find us.
Okay, and thank you, Andy Koch, our sound engineer, for finding that for us. Okay, so let me ask you about the Alliance and its structure and makeup a little bit, not getting in the weeds too much, but I've heard that they're a consciously black-led organization, but I've been to events and have known members. It's not an all-black organization. You have people of all different kinds, Filipino, Palestinian, white, Latino, whatever there is in Chicago or in the USA, they're in the Alliance. And so why are you consciously black-led, and why do you have this structure the way you do?
So we're black-led. Like I said, the system oppresses the vast majority of people in the world. This imperialist system that benefits a few thousand people, or that profits, I should say. these are the people who own like half the resources in the world and make like 90% of the political decisions. And in order to fight those people, we need to use our resources, and we don't have the resources that they have. We don't have the money, the equipment, the like buildings, the land, but we do have the numbers. So just like an individual is not going to make systemic change, it works much better to make systemic change when you have groups of people working together. And as an oppressed nation within the United States, within the country of the United States, Black people have always been struggling against white supremacy, in different ways. And some of those ways have included solidarity with people of other oppressed nations and with working class white people. And we understand that. So we're not a Black only organization, but we are a Black led organization because, we believe that because Black people get the most hell from the system, basically, as a group of people, we're the most revolutionary. So the leadership of our organization is Black, but we work with people of all different backgrounds. As long as they're interested in liberation of Black people and of all people, we're on the same side.
Let me ask you about that, because I know, and this relates to international solidarity, I think, as well. When Sister Rasmia Oda was being deported and eventually was deported from the United States, an activist in the Palestinian community here in Chicago. The Chicago Alliance was one of the main organizations that supported her and supported the work, and made trips to Michigan to fight against her deportation. And there was even, I saw some of the newspaper clippings. People were stunned that Black and Palestinian people working together, and a lot of that I know was the alliances organizing in solidarity and support. Could you talk about international solidarity, and maybe particularly the issue with Rasmia and the Palestinians?
Yeah, and that's there's so many examples. A lot of people don't believe in solidarity for whatever reason, but there's so many examples of it existing in the real world. In Ferguson, Palestinians were giving advice to protesters on how to handle tear gas because the tear gas manufacturers that were tear gassing people in Ferguson were using equipment made by the Israeli state. The Israeli occupation forces, they collude with the police forces here all the time, and they are supported by American tax dollars, the American government's money. So because the system of imperialism is an international system and there's all these connections between oppressors, it's the same thing in South Africa where I grew up. Ronald Reagan supported apartheid, as did Nixon and all those other presidents. The Israeli state also was very close friends with the apartheid South African regime. Because of that, you see this solidarity between Palestinians and South Africans, as well as South Africans and African Americans and people all over the world. So whenever there is oppression anywhere in the world, because we're all in this single interconnected system, a win against imperialism anywhere is a win against imperialism everywhere. So we have to be in support of each other's struggles.
Let me move to another sector. I hear at Alliance events they go out of their way to lift up and to show that they're working with organized labor. Why is organized labor and trade unions in this country so important to the goals that the Alliance has?
Something that a lot of people, something that Marx recognized and that Marxists recognize, but that is kind of taboo to talk about in the U.S. because of all this bourgeois indoctrination, is the fact that labor is what keeps society running. The workers who who teach, like, present company, who drive buses, people who work in the mines, people who keep spaces clean, who, work in construction, every kind of labor. That's what keeps us all alive, so that's also where the fraction of a 1%, that's where they get their money from. So when workers understand that, and when they when they're together and they're consciously organized, they have the power to shut the whole system down just by not showing up to work, just by going on strike. So we've always been in support of organized labor in the city, and organized labor has been, a great supporter of ours, especially in the fight for ECPS. The Service Employees International Union, the Healthcare Workers of Illinois, SEIU, HCII, they helped immensely. They phone banked to all their members, their tens of thousands of members, and they had a lobbyist working with us full time on calling all the persons and whipping them into shape to support ECPS.
No, there was broad support for ECPS and even for CPAC. I know my union, the Chicago Teachers Union, endorsed it, and there was AFSCME Local 2858, the letter carriers, hotel and restaurant employees, SEIU Local 73 as well. And I'm probably forgetting some as I start a list. I probably shouldn't do that. Let me ask you about another campaign of the Alliance. Could you say what Cfist stands for and what that is?
Yeah, so Cfist, I mentioned Gerald Reed earlier. Cfist is the Campaign to Free Incarcerated Survivors of Torture. So Gerald Reed and hundreds of other, mostly black men, but, black women too, and, people of other nationalities as well, including Puerto Ricans who were framed by Detective Ronaldo Guevara.
So this is just in Chicago or hundreds nationally?
This is just in Chicago.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So this has been a practice for decades. Going back as long as there's been a police force in Chicago. They've been torturing people, and what they did to Gerald Reed. There's accounts of it out there. Like I won't get into the details, but they tortured him. They injured him. Like he's still struggling with a lot of those injuries. And they tortured him in 1990, forced him to confess to a double homicide that he did not commit. And this was, this became public knowledge. It wasn't, I don't think John Burge specifically tortured Gerald Reed, but everybody knew that everybody has known for years that John Burge and the detectives working under him, were notorious for torturing people. And even with that knowledge being public, there are still hundreds of torture survivors that we know of who are still... So
the demand is to free these hundreds of people that were tortured. What could people do to support that?
They can call the governor, J.B. Pritzker. The movement made J.B. Pritzker sign a clemency petition for Gerald Reed. And that's how Gerald Reed is, walking... is a free man right now, or mostly free, because the system still kind of has its claws in him. But J.B. Pritzker, he doesn't even need to do that much work. He can just lift up a pen and sign these clemency petitions, and free everybody who we know of who has been tortured. But that practice has been so central to the way the police do things. It's not just Chicago. It's not just John Burge in the 80s and 90s, or 70s, 80s, and 90s. This is, a core part of policing. And anybody who has been through the system can tell you that. Anybody who knows people who've been through the system can tell you that they are very, very used to torturing people or in other ways coercing people to confess to things. So fighting for the freedom of people like Gerald Reed and other people who've been tortured is a crucial way to fight against the system as a whole, because it undermines the legitimacy of, all this like law and order nonsense that they're talking about.
So let me ask you this then. So we're trying to get the tortured victims out of jail, but I want to ask you about the guy who killed Laquan McDonald, Jason Van Dyke. He was convicted. He was sentenced, and he's just recently been released from jail. And the Alliance is actually asking to send him back to jail. So here's a case where you're trying to send somebody to jail. And this actually stands, some people in the movement, people that call themselves abolitionists, some of them anyways, may disagree with this. Could you talk about Jason Van Dyke and why you think it's important to send him back to jail?
Yeah, I mean, some of them is the key here. That's been a conversation that's been had quite a few times. But we still have, a lot of abolitionists supporting our movement. Some of them don't necessarily agree on this point, but some of them do. But I guess the simplest way to put it is we want different things for our enemies than we want for ourselves. And, we have to be very clear that Jason Van Dyke is not the same as Gerald Reed. Gerald Reed was targeted because he was a young black man. Jason Van Dyke killed somebody who was a young black man. So they're on two opposite sides of the fight for liberation. So when somebody is a committed enemy of black people, when someone has killed for white supremacy, we don't need that person to be free. So, that's something that we fight for whenever a police officer kills someone, is that we do fight for them to go to jail, because that's not a friend of ours.
So I have one last question for you, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time here today and telling us the story about the Alliance. But I'm curious, we've been talking, on a deeper political level, but how did you get involved in this? People don't wake up just one day and say, hey, I want to get tortured people out of jail, or I want to do this or that. What motivated you on a personal level to say, okay, this is something? Because I know you've been putting in all kinds of time. When I go to a rally or whatever, looking around, I see you there, and you're a leader that puts in, and it was really sacrificed for this movement. What motivated you to do that in the first place?
I wouldn't say I've sacrificed that much. I've only been here for about 3 years now. Compared to people like Frank Chapman, people who've been in the movement for as long as, since my mother was a toddler, I haven't really done that much. But so I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. I moved here for university, and here being Chicago for university in 2015. So I saw a lot of the same racist systems, still enduring past, when we were supposed to have been free, in South Africa and in the U.S. And, after a few years, it kind of becomes clear that, nobody's, this stuff doesn't just change on its own. We have to, every single person who sees that systemic racism is a problem has to get involved. And I kind of started dipping my toes in the water around 2018, but I still wasn't fully clear on what's going on in the world. But I mean, I'm still not. I don't want to act like I know everything. But I started doing poetry for Freedom Road Socialist Organization, another amazing organization that I'm now a member of. And at a few of their events, I did some poetry. But the event that really that had quite an impact on me was the Black History Month event in February of 2019, where Armanda Shackelford, who is Gerald Reed's mother, she's been fighting for him for 30 years, and she's been such an inspiration to so many people in the city, and taught us so much about struggling for justice, not just for Gerald Reed. She said this so many times, and she's still in the movement, as even as she's getting older. she said that it's not just about Gerald Reed, it's about everybody, it's about the system. So I listened to Amanda Shackelford and I listened to Frank Chapman, as they both spoke about this system from the perspectives of people who've been so impacted by it, so brutalized by it. And, I just said to myself, this is the organization that I want to join. If I'm going to make some change, these are the people that I'm going to make it with. And I went to a meeting on Monday. We still have Monday meetings every week at 6 p.m. They're on Zoom now because of the pandemic. But I went to the first Monday meeting I went to, started taking on roles here and there. One of the first was tabling, just talking to people. And that kind of turned into taking notes at meetings, doing social media work, just, being there for things that need to be done, because there's always things that need to be done. And, we are a volunteer organization, so we don't have, you just kind of get in where you fit in. So I just kept, getting in, and I'm still, getting in where I fit in, and, just doing as much as I can.
Well, thank you, Kobi. This has been a real joy talking to you. Thank you for, you brought knowledge to people, not just to me, but hopefully to people on this podcast. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I told you that was going to be a good interview. Kobi Guillory, thank you so much for being our first guest on our show, setting the bar really high for us, and one we intend to meet, by the way. We're going to have good guests here week after week, and we want all our listeners to continue to tune in. Kobi wanted me to make sure that we put in our show notes the contact information for the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, so wherever you are in the country, you can contact them and hopefully get involved in what they're doing. Also, the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, if you're interested in learning more about them, or if you're in the Chicagoland area, we encourage you to get in contact with them. We're going to put both of these into our show notes. Also, Kobi wanted me to make sure that we put in two of the campaigns that the Alliance is involved in right now. He mentioned in the interview the brutal murder of Laquan McDonald, and that Jason Van Dyke, the police officer who murdered him, is got out of jail with very little time. And the Alliance is calling for the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois to indict Jason Van Dyke. So there's a letter that you can sign on to in our show notes. Also, the Alliance is involved in what they call Cfist. We talked about that a little bit. The Campaign to Free Incarcerated Survivors of Torture. And so for torture survivors and the wrongfully convicted, this is a very important thing. The families of these people are deeply involved in it as well, and we look for your support on that. Also, I just want to point out to people, Fight Back Radio is a production of fightbacknews.org, and bringing you news and views of the people's struggles. And we encourage you to go there, take a look at the website for fightbacknews.org. In our show notes, we're going to have our contact information for Fight Back and for Fight Back Radio. Also, before I sign off, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you, give us 5 stars. We're trying to move up the projections, so when people start looking for podcasts, they'll find us. 5 stars helps us. A positive review helps us. Our intention is for this to come out every 2 weeks, and we're going to drop it on a Sunday always. So your next podcast of Fight Back Radio will be on May 29th, and we're going to do that regularly. We'll be good about that. And we're going to have another great guest, and one after the other. We have several people lined up. I'm excited to have folks on here. If you have ideas of who we should have, feel free to send me an email saying that, making your recommendations. But lastly, before I do sign off, I want to thank the people that worked so hard to make this podcast a reality. Our production team of Andy Koch, Shane Tremley, and Vince Olson. This could not have been done without them. And so I thank you so much. So for the entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg, saying until next time, all power to the people.